Studies. I'm Sandy Behan, and our guest today is Carolyn Thompson, representative from the 44th District. Is that correct? Okay. You've been a busy lady lately.
Yes, that's all right. I'm earning my pay.
Good. I thought we might start off today by talking a little bit about Task Force 2000, some of the proposals that have been in the newspaper that they have made in the last week or so, and particularly the one that most immediately interests me, which is teacher tenure.
Okay.
You want to explain a little bit about what the proposal was last Friday and what direction they seem to be moving in?
That's been their most difficult sticking point, and the one that the task force has spent more time on, I guess because it's been more controversial. As you know, the committee is about half educators and half business people, and it's been an educational process internally within the committee of the business people expressing their concerns as to and trying to understand how tenure really works, and the educators trying to understand the public's concerns and at the same time educate their counterparts as to how the system really works. I think the task force has concluded, and I was reading their draft report, which we must keep in mind will change. Today is Friday the 27th, and they're meeting as we speak, and I know they will be revising the tenure section since they have received a tremendous amount of input since they tentatively voted their draft report last Friday. But they conclude preliminarily that tenure is largely a matter of perception. The problem that exists that somehow you cannot get rid of bad teachers, which really isn't true. You can. It's a cumbersome process. Not many people are willing to do that. And teachers and both administrators, and I think the public feels like it locks in too many inadequate persons that are perhaps in a classroom and that could be better utilized elsewhere. So I think they recommend pretty much changing the statutes regarding the tenure situation, call it protection for tenure for teachers, grounds for dismissal. Currently, a teacher can be dismissed according to the statutes for what is called just cause. Now, just cause is not defined in the statutes, and the task force recommends that specific enumerated items be listed as to what constitutes grounds for dismissal. I think that's good. I don't think administrators oftentimes have been trained, particularly in college or in their staff development training, as to the procedure to make changes internally and then ultimately if they need to dismiss somebody. And so they would set up a clear system of standards and criteria, and then if what was then defined as just cause was perceived to be existing, they would recommend that that be grounds for dismissal. At that point, it would go to a peer review panel of two teachers appointed by the teacher organization, and I think one teacher appointed by the administration. These people, again, would have had to have sufficient training by yet an unnamed area. It could be an outside consultant brought in to do that. It could be the State Department of Education. We really haven't, I guess they hadn't gotten that far. And we go through a very specific, a very legal review process, not unlike the other professions do. The legal profession does this, the medical profession does this, and I think the point of it is to bring the teaching profession in line with the way the other professions handle their internal grounds for dismissal. If then the peer review panel voted that there was not sufficient grounds for dismissal, then that would be the end of it. If they did go ahead and agree with the recommendation of the administration, then it would go on to the school board as it does now. I think some of that will change today. I think they are talking about it perhaps is too controversial, too much in a small school particularly. It could be a problem having teachers that teach within the same building with somebody that has been put up for review for dismissal, and that we may go to, the task force may go to, not unlike when North Central comes in and accredits school and teachers rotate and the administrators review the progress and the standards of other school districts. And so we may have teams of people that would do this. It could include, for example, the state teacher of the year and other people that have been specifically trained to be able to come in. And that way it wouldn't always be somebody perhaps from within your own community, because that could be perhaps a difficult situation, like I said, in some of our very smaller schools. But it's a a tough issue that I know the task force feels like has needed to be dealt with. I can tell you internally within the legislature, if you went around and did a poll of them, and we have, which are the most important issues that task force should address before you will be able to address the issue of revenue. Tenure is at the top of probably 95% of them's list. And so I do believe that it is largely perception, and that if we can clearly delineate what tenure is, or what grounds for dismissal are, or what protections for teachers are, we'll be a lot further along. We absolutely have to keep, of course, First Amendment rights and due process rights that are guaranteed of any public official and state employee, and that will remain in the statutes as well. I know that's a long answer, but it's an issue that a lot of people have been tremendously concerned about, and I'm sure it will go under further review as it makes its way through the legislative process.
Okay, well, you're an educator. I know
Right.
you don't think of yourself as a former educator. You have been an educator in the public schools in the past, although you're a legislator right now. My perception is that tenure per se isn't really ideally necessary. No one wants bad teachers in the classroom, and most of us do try to do a good job. That it to me, as a former executive director of a teachers association, a lot of it is an administrative problem, and that the procedures are there for removing teachers who do not do a good job, and it's a matter of everyone doing what they're supposed to do in order to be able to remove that teacher. And it's a difficult process, and it ought to be a difficult process.
It absolutely should be.
But none of us want bad teachers in the classroom.
That's right.
And so there, to me anyway, there shouldn't be that fear of doing the quote-unquote right thing. But it's a legal thing that needs to be very closely watched. And it's a real concern. When I read the paper, the peer review, I thought, well, this is going to be real interesting. Because you also, the complaint on the other side is that you have board members and other people who have arbitrary and capricious reasons for wanting teachers to be dismissed. Whether, legally they may not have any grounds, but there's still realistic feelings that these people have.
I feel confidence in Chairman Singer's approach to this. He is a graduate of Harvard Law School and understands very well the legalistic side of this, which myself, not being a lawyer, have had to rely on others for. And so I think he's going into this with the right framework and is trying to achieve a consensus to be able to bring the committee's recommendations as much as possible to a majority. And quite surprisingly, last Friday, the 4 classroom teachers, now they are half educators, but others are administrators or counselors or superintendents, but the 4 teachers voted unanimously for this tenure proposal. And so I think everybody's trying to work really hard to come up with a consensus on this area.
Okay, the other area that I thought was real interesting is the area of school consolidation. They seem to be saying that they want to give incentives that will move toward a consolidation of schools in Oklahoma, but they're not really ready to come out and legislate consolidation. You want to explain perhaps some of the political reasons why they're moving in that direction, or is that a misperception?
No, I think it's a quite accurate perception. I think a lot of times we haven't really thought through the implications of forced consolidation. It's interesting going to all the public hearings around the state, as I did these last few months. People in the urban areas think, my gosh, we've got to consolidate schools, and their thinking is that's going to close all those rural schools. And the people in the rural areas think, my gosh, we've got to consolidate all those schools, and they think that's going to mean all the schools in Oklahoma City and Tulsa. And the fact of the matter is, if we had true, just say we're going to eliminate arbitrarily half the school districts in Oklahoma, that would mean a tremendous amount of urban as well as rural schools. And just watching the fight in Oklahoma City a couple of months ago, remember when Southeast High School was threatened or was recommended for closing, the tremendous amount of response in the Oklahoma City area against that because they felt like that had been a base of community, all the feelings that more rural areas have, that, and many times the town does revolve around the school, and that is their center of activity and of community, and they don't want to take that away because they think you're closing their town, and perhaps that would be true as well. I have come a long way and used to believe more strongly in the fact that we ought to just get rid of 90% of the school districts in Oklahoma and go to, say, a county system, or go to, like I say, just eliminate a tremendous amount of them. The fact is, what we get to the next step of what criteria do you use to close those schools. And the facts are some of the best schools in this state are some of the very small rural schools. And some of the worst ones in this state are some of the larger schools. And how do you decide which ones to close and which ones to not close? And then you get to the issue of, well, you have to develop standards, some kind of criteria to do that. States that have successfully closed a large number of their school districts have taken that approach. They have set standards that certain schools, that all schools must meet, accreditation standards, curriculum standards, course offering standards. And fortunately now we have had the colleges and universities around Oklahoma setting goals and admission standards and developing criteria for their own internal institutions. Whereas now we can make the case, if you want to be able to graduate students in your school that have the option of going to OU or OSU, given our new admission standards, that school is going to have to offer physics and calculus and foreign language and et cetera. And certainly every parent in communities would want at least their child to have the opportunity to do that, whether or not they choose to or not. And by the way, the four-year colleges in this state have just raised their admission standards. And so what is happening is that communities are demanding, my goodness, why isn't our school offering physics or calculus? And if they're not, the state should put in enough incentives for them to consolidate with the neighboring schools so they'd have the ability to share resources, and that it come from the bottom up rather than the top down. I think that's the approach that will in the long run be more effective, and I think perhaps happen quicker. I think if you just arbitrarily said we're going to do this, there would be such a war, such a backlash that we may never get there, because so many hard feelings would be set in, so much fear would set in, and that if we go through the standards approach, the accountability approach, and that's really what we ought to do. If a school is good and can perform, they ought to stay open, and if they can't, then they need to either be closed or to find a way to keep themselves to be able to meet those standards. Another portion of this, which is very harsh, but I think it's good, is that if schools do not meet certain standards, the State Department of Education can automatically close them. And so they will be under a tremendous amount of pressure to either improve themselves, be able to offer those things, and in a lot of cases there just is not the resources to do that. So they will either close themselves, be closed by the State Department of Education, or they'll start looking around real fast for another school district to merge with, so they'll be able to offer those kinds of things and to provide. I mean, there are requirements in here that require counselors and librarians and all the things that schools should have, and a lot of schools in Oklahoma can't do that. And so I think you'll see a lot of consolidation in these next few years. This is the approach South Carolina and North Carolina took. They passed what they call their reform package in 1985-86, and they've reduced by hundreds the number of school districts in that state. And I think that retains some community, some local control, and it's better achieved that way. And I've really come a longer way in my thinking than when I first started looking into this. And I just think this is a better approach than it's kind of a top-down, heavy-handed system.
Okay, we'll be back in just a moment with two students from Central Mid-High to talk with Carolyn Thompson. We're back with two students from Central Mid High School, Ryan Davis and Susan Woods, who are going to visit with Carolyn Thompson. Ryan, I think we'll start with you today.
Okay. The issue of flag burning has been a source of national controversy. What do you think needs to be done, if anything, and what is your personal opinion?
Well, you're right. It's a national issue, thank goodness. It's not a statewide issue. My personal opinion is that I disagree with President Bush that it should not be the basis for a constitutional amendment. I think the First Amendment should be left alone. And at a at a maximum, what should happen is exactly what the Congress has done, and that is enact a law which makes it a fine, a minor fine to desecrate the flag, and we should leave it at that.
Susan?
The competency test for seniors graduating in '93 is going to be put into effect this year, and I'll be the first freshman. Well, a senior class will have to take it.
Congratulations.
Thank you.
And your condolences.
Do you think that it should be there, or should they change it?
I think it should be there. I think if you look around, most other states have implemented a competency test for graduation. I was concerned about it, of course, preliminarily, but there are many safeguards built into it. I do think when you graduate from high school, that high school diploma should mean something, and it should mean to the college that you go to or the employer that you are seeking employment from a certain level of competency, a certain level of skills. And I think the competency test will be a part of achieving that. As you know, in Oklahoma, we test regularly 3, 7, 9, and 11 throughout your school career. And so the purpose of that, of course, is to identify problems before you get to being a senior in high school to take the competency exam. It will make those other tests more meaningful. And I think we need to work harder at making sure that they are not just an arbitrary measure of achievement, that they be considered in a larger framework with other areas of progress or means of measuring progress, that you do not solely rely too heavily on a test score, because some people just can't take tests very well, and there's cultural biases and sometimes intellectual biases built into those things. But that should help a student along the way, and so curriculum can be adjusted, perhaps special or different attention be given to different areas. So hopefully you build up to the level where by the time you do become a senior, there's not much problem. If there is I guess, fallout of being able to take the test more than once that's provided for in the law, as well as if you just plain ever cannot pass it, you still graduate. You get a certificate of completion rather than a regular high school diploma. Of course, you can come back anytime, and it's not any different than those that opt for a GED. That again is a test that you take to receive your high school diploma. But I think it's not as perhaps dangerous as many people have initially perceived it to be, because there are these safeguards built in, and yet at the same time, in the long run, I think it will provide more meaning, as I said, for a high school diploma. And we'll have minimum competencies that you can then say all graduates of Norman High School have, and that too, we all know Norman is one of the best school systems in the state, and we regularly score amongst the highest in the state, and will be an incentive for many of the other school districts to change their curriculum, and they should. Fewer than 10% of high schools in Oklahoma offer the upper level math classes that Norman High School has. Only 60% have foreign language in their whole school district, and many of the other things that we are so fortunate in having here in Norman just aren't offered elsewhere. And that, I think, again, back to your instructor's point earlier about consolidation, I think if they know that their students are going to have to pass this test to graduate, and to pass this test there's going to have to be certain curriculum offerings, they're going to either have to go to great lengths to offer those curriculum courses, or they're not going to be able to have their students pass the exam, and that will be a further incentive for school districts to shape up or be out of here. What do you think about it, since you're going to be the first?
I think it's a good idea. I moved here from Texas in June, so it's my first taste of Oklahoma schools, and I think they're really good, and I like it. The only thing that's bothering me about it is the physical science instead of biology as a freshman, but there are a lot of courses, college algebra, and a lot of neat stuff I can take, so I think the competency test is a good idea.
Good.
What about special ed students? Will they take the similar test, or?
They will, as they do currently, have an individual instruction plan set for them, which will include variations of this test, and so they have been accounted for in the program.
That's not the information we were given. We were given the information that they would take the same test everyone else takes.
I don't believe that's true, Cindy. I'll
That
go
may
back
be
and
something
look.
we need to get clarified.
Sure. I'll make a note of that and do that. Senate Bill 183. I remember that was it.
I think you have another part of your question there, Susan, that you might want to ask.
Who's going to write the test?
The State Department of Education is currently searching for someone that they will contract with. The Task Force 2000, and this is a good thing because they've come in at the right time before decisions really have been made, and produced some guidelines, some areas they hope that the State Department uses in choosing who will help write this test for Oklahoma. And they think it ought to be as broad a testing tool as possible, not so much specifics, but more comprehensive in a person's ability to think and to use logic rather than knowing what the square mileage is of Honduras, or some arbitrary fact. And so I'm glad that they have done that, and then I think we will hopefully be able to produce the best test possible by the time that you're a senior. They also are recommending here, by 1993, a revised curriculum for the entire state of Oklahoma. And so that will have a tremendous impact on the test, and I think we're probably going to have to make some changes. If we're changing the curriculum at the same time we're trying to implement a test, competency test. I'm not sure yet how that will work, but it's something we may need to look into before 1993 arrives.
You were a government teacher, right?
Yes, and I'll teach government very differently when I go back.
Are you aware that this test, as it stands now, there will be a government test in there for kids at least here in Norman. There are kids who will never have had government.
That long concerned me. Of course, when I was a government teacher, we are the only state that does not require government. Now, you have to have civics in the 8th grade, by the 8th grade, but that's it. And that concerned me a great deal, and I hope that's one of the areas that the new curriculum will address, as well as perhaps foreign languages and other areas as well. I also think, and I'm glad the report heavily suggests as well, a healthy curriculum, healthy living type curriculum from K through 12 that will focus on. We have such a scattered approach now to drug education and health education and sex education and AIDS education. If that could better be achieved in a sequential way from the time you start preschool or kindergarten through 12th grade, I think would be an important component of the curriculum, and it's one I hope they adopt as well as mandatory government. One of the goals here they're saying the goals of their school system should be to produce a better citizen. And it's hard for me to understand how you do that if you don't even require or have any coursework in government other than an 8th grade civics education.
Abortion has been a recent area of controversy. What is your opinion on abortion, and what do you think the state laws should be?
I think we should do exactly as Florida did a few weeks ago, and that is nothing. We have one of the toughest abortion statutes on the books right now. We virtually parallel Missouri, which is what the Webster decision was based on. And until the Supreme Court modifies that or changes their position and throws more responsibility or more decision-making back to the states, I think we should absolutely stay where we are as far as the abortion measures that are on the statutes in Oklahoma.
All right. What about state or federal funding for abortion? Are you for or against that?
I would have disagreed with President Bush in that you should not have arbitrary standards for funding abortions based on income, that they should be uniformly applied, and that you should not discriminate in any way.
The death penalty is a big controversial question. What's your personal opinion on that?
My personal opinion is it's not working, and there's such tremendous variation between the states. We in Oklahoma are in the 10th Circuit, I believe, on the federal level, which means the death penalty is usually overturned by a court in Colorado. Texas, on the other hand, and Florida are in a different federal zone, and so their philosophy and their court system is very, very different, and they've had many more executions than we have in Oklahoma. In fact, I don't think we've had any in the last 25 years. So virtually it's become to be meaningless. It is not proven to be a deterrent for crime as it currently exists, and I think we should reevaluate the situation. Unfortunately, that's not a state area. Only the federal government can do that, or the federal court system can do that. I know The Attorney General has been working in that area, but it's not something I've really dealt with much in my work in the legislature.
Okay. George Bush has declared a, quote, war on drugs. In Oklahoma, there is a problem with drugs in the schools. What do you think needs to be done, and why, and what are you yourself doing to promote this, quote, war?
Quote, war on wars. I agree with the President that there's a tremendous problem, and I'd really be curious to hear what you all think of the efforts that's been made in the schools. We do have a terrible problem that's impacting our adults, our children, and our society. You know, Oklahoma has toughest law enforcement laws about in the nation. Consequently, we send more people to prison than about any other state. We are first in the nation as the number of people that we incarcerate if they're female. We are third in the nation if they're male, Ryan. I don't know why. So, but interesting enough, most of the people going to prison these days are younger. They're 23 years old and younger, or younger, and 90% of them are there because of drug-related offenses. And it concerns me as someone who cares and wishes to do more for education in Oklahoma when I see the corrections budget getting bigger and bigger and bigger and the human services budget getting larger and larger because of so much unemployment and for a variety of other reasons. And I think we all know a tremendous amount of both of those areas is related to the drug problem. As I mentioned earlier, what can be done, I think we need to start earlier. I think junior high school or high school is much too late. And I think we need to start virtually by the time a student begins their school career, and that ought to mean a comprehensive health education that ought to include AIDS education, health education, physical education, drug education, and teen pregnancy education. I don't think you can start too soon. Another thing that the Task Force 2000 recommends, which two states have done very successfully, and that is Arkansas and Missouri have started parenting programs. If you become a parent, the state automatically works with you and teaches you how to become a parent. You know, there's no training to be a parent. We all know how you get to become a parent, but once you do that, and that doesn't take very long, the process of raising a child is an area that's been virtually ignored. And so they have started programs which teach parents how to talk to their children about drugs and about becoming a teen mother and about AIDS and these kinds of things. And I think that is an area we ought to look at and be able to place some resources into in Oklahoma. So I think some of the drug awareness programs have been successful. Unfortunately, they're very sporadic. Not all school districts have them. Not all school districts have been able to afford them. I think in Norman we've been fairly fortunate because of the strong commitment and a lot of volunteers within the community, yet at the same time we still have a tremendous problem in Norman as well. You all have probably been through some of the drug programs. Tell me what you think. Are they a good deal, or?
It's rather wimpy, as I mean.
There's a federal term.
I hate to interrupt this, but that's all the time we have right now.
Okay.
I want to thank Carolyn and Ryan and Susan, and we'll be back with another edition of Capital Ideas.